The CNN studio buzzed with anticipation as makeup artists applied final touches and production assistants scurried about checking camera angles. Tonight's town hall promised to be explosive, featuring two of the most talked-about young politicians in America, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas and former Trump press secretary Karoline Leavitt from New Hampshire. The topic was immigration policy, but everyone in the room sensed this would become something much more personal. Anderson Cooper adjusted his tie and reviewed his notes one final time as the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good evening and welcome to this special CNN town hall on immigration reform. I'm Anderson Cooper, and tonight we're joined by two prominent voices representing very different perspectives on one of America's most contentious issues. Please welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas's 30th District and former White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. The audience of 300 carefully selected voters applauded as both women took their seats. Jasmine wore a sharp navy blazer that commanded respect while maintaining approachability. Her leather portfolio sat unopened on her lap, though her fingers drummed lightly against it. Karoline chose a burgundy dress that projected authority, her blonde hair styled in the same fashion that had become her trademark during her White House days. Her confidence was palpable as she smiled and waved to the crowd. Cooper began with standard opening questions about border security and asylum policies. Karoline delivered polished talking points about legal immigration pathways and border enforcement that could have been lifted directly from Republican strategy documents. Her answers were smooth, practiced, and completely predictable. Jasmine responded with nuanced policy positions backed by specific legislative examples and statistical data. She spoke about comprehensive reform and humanitarian obligations with the precision of someone who had actually read the bills, rather than just the talking points. For the first 20 minutes, the exchange remained civil, if pointed. Then Cooper asked the question that would change everything. Congresswoman Crockett, some critics argue that your immigration stance is influenced more by political calculation than genuine concern for immigrants. How do you respond to suggestions that you're simply pandering to your base? Jasmine's response was measured and thoughtful. She spoke about her district's diversity, about meeting with actual immigrant families, about the human cost of failed policies. Her authenticity shone through every word. When she finished, Karoline couldn't resist taking the bait. Anderson, if I may respond to that. It's interesting to hear Congresswoman Crockett talk about authenticity when it comes to immigration. I think the American people deserve to know whether their representatives have genuine connections to these issues, or whether they're simply adopting positions that poll well with certain demographics. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The audience sensed the shift immediately. This was no longer a policy debate. It was about to become personal. Cooper leaned forward, recognizing the pivot. Ms. Leavitt, are you questioning Congresswoman Crockett's motives on immigration policy? Karoline's smile had an edge to it now. I'm simply saying that voters have a right to know about the backgrounds and experiences that shape their representatives' positions. Some of us have deep generational roots in this country and understand what it means to be truly American. The implication was clear, and the audience held its collective breath. Several people in the front row exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was the kind of moment that could end careers or launch them to new heights. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Her fingers stopped drumming against the portfolio. Instead, she opened it with deliberate slowness and removed a manila folder. That's a fascinating perspective, Karoline. Since you've raised the question of generational roots and what it means to be truly American, perhaps we should examine that more closely. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I find it particularly interesting coming from someone whose own family's immigration story is, shall we say, more complex than she's led people to believe. Karoline's confident smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman. Oh, I'm not implying anything. Jasmine opened the folder and removed several documents. I'm stating facts. You see, when you question someone's American authenticity, it's important to have your own house in order. The studio fell silent except for the barely audible hum of cameras. Cooper realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. In his decades of journalism, he'd seen politicians clash, but this felt different. This felt like watching someone methodically dismantle an opponent's entire public persona. Jasmine continued, her voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Your great-grandfather, William Leavitt, didn't arrive on the Mayflower as your family's carefully crafted narrative suggests. According to immigration records I have here from Ellis Island, he arrived in 1923 under quite different circumstances. She held up the first document, angled so the cameras could capture it. Ellis Island Immigration Manifest, October 15, 1923. William Leavitt listed as Wilhelm Lewitsky, fleeing economic hardship in Eastern Europe. The gasps from the audience were audible. Karoline's face went pale. That's completely fabricated. Actually, it's not. Jasmine produced another document. This is a certified copy from the National Archives. Your great-grandfather changed his name from Wilhelm Lewitsky to William Leavitt in 1925, 2 years after arriving. He was, by today's standards that your party promotes, exactly the kind of economic migrant that current Republican immigration policy seeks to exclude. But there's more. The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to have forgotten to breathe. Karoline tried to recover. Even if that were true, which I dispute, that was a different era with different circumstances. Oh, it gets better. Jasmine pulled out another set of documents. Wilhelm Lewitsky, your great-grandfather, actually entered the country using false documentation. According to these records, he claimed to be a skilled craftsman when he was actually fleeing debt and possible criminal charges in his home country. The modern Republican Party would classify him as exactly the kind of undesirable immigrant who should be immediately deported. The audience erupted in murmurs and whispers. Cooper tried to maintain control. Ms. Leavitt, would you like to respond to these allegations? But Jasmine wasn't finished. She had spent months preparing for this moment, knowing that Karoline's immigration hardline stance made her particularly vulnerable to this kind of exposure. There's something else the American people should know about the Leavitt family's relationship with immigration. She produced yet another document. In 1943, during World War II, your grandfather, William Jr., filed a petition to sponsor several family members from Europe. These weren't legal immigrants, Karoline. These were war refugees whose documentation had been destroyed. People who, under today's Republican immigration policies, would be turned away at the border because they couldn't prove their identities. Karoline's composure was completely shattered now. Her face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, fear. This is a complete ambush. You're twisting historical records to make political points. Am I? Jasmine's voice remained steady. Or am I simply providing context for your statement about having deep generational roots and understanding what it means to be truly American? Your family's entire American story is built on the exact kind of immigration that you now advocate against. They were economic migrants who used false documentation, received refugee assistance, and sponsored family members through humanitarian programs. Everything you call chain migration, and everything your party wants to eliminate. The CNN audience was completely captivated. This wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in research and preparation. Jasmine had turned Karoline's attack completely around, using her own family history as a weapon against her. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Jasmine reached into her folder one more time and produced a photograph alongside several letters. But here's what I find most interesting about your family's immigration story, Karoline. She held up the photograph so the cameras could capture it clearly. This is a photograph from 1944 of your grandfather, William Jr., at a rally in Boston. Can you tell the audience what kind of rally this was? The photograph showed a young man in a crowd holding a sign that read, "Welcome War Refugees." Karoline stared at the image as if seeing a ghost. Your grandfather wasn't just someone who benefited from generous immigration policies. He was an activist who advocated for them. These letters, which I have here, show that he regularly wrote to congressmen urging them to accept more European refugees, to streamline asylum processes, and to provide government assistance for new immigrants. Jasmine paused for effect, letting the full weight of the contradiction sink in. So when you talk about deep generational roots and true American values, you're absolutely right. Your family's true American values included fighting for exactly the kind of comprehensive, humanitarian immigration policies that I support and that you oppose. The audience erupted in applause. Several people stood up. Cooper realized he was witnessing a political moment that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Karoline sat frozen, her entire political brand crumbling in real time. Every speech she'd given about immigration, every hardline position she'd taken, every appeal to nativist sentiment was now exposed as a betrayal of her own family's legacy. Jasmine closed the folder but kept it in her hands. So to answer your original question about authenticity and genuine connections to immigration issues, I think the record speaks for itself. My family came here seeking opportunity and justice, just like yours did. The difference is that I honor that legacy by fighting for policies that would have helped both our families. You've chosen to dishonor yours by advocating for policies that would have kept your own great-grandfather out of this country. The studio fell silent again as the full impact of Jasmine's response settled over everyone. This wasn't just a political victory. It was a complete demolition of an opponent's credibility using their own family history against them. Cooper tried to give Karoline a chance to respond. Ms. Leavitt, how do you respond to these revelations about your family's immigration history? Karoline's voice came out smaller than it had all evening. These documents, I would need time to verify their authenticity. These are serious allegations that require careful review. But even as she spoke, everyone in the room could see that she knew the documents were real. Her entire demeanor had changed from confident attacker to confused defendant. Jasmine seized the moment to deliver her final blow. Karoline, these aren't allegations. These are historical facts available to anyone willing to do the research. The only reason this information is surprising is because your family's real immigration story doesn't fit the political narrative you've chosen to embrace. The question isn't whether these documents are authentic. The question is whether you'll continue to advocate for policies that betray your own family's legacy and the values that made their American dream possible. The audience erupted in sustained applause. Social media exploded in real time as clips of the exchange began circulating. Within minutes, hashtags like Family Secrets and Leavitt Lies were trending nationwide. Political commentators were already calling it one of the most devastating political takedowns in television history. Cooper tried to steer the conversation back to policy, but the damage was done. For the remaining 30 minutes of the program, Karoline was a shell of her former self. Her answers lacked conviction, her confidence was shattered, and her credibility was in ruins. Every time she tried to make a point about immigration, the audience could only think about her great-grandfather Wilhelm fleeing with false papers. When the program ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Karoline sat motionless in her chair while Jasmine calmly organized her documents. The audience filed out in animated discussion, many of them recording reaction videos on their phones. Within an hour, the full exchange was available on YouTube and had been viewed over 1 million times. Political analysts immediately recognized the significance of what had happened. This wasn't just one politician outmaneuvering another. It was a demonstration of how thorough preparation and research could completely neutralize personal attacks. Jasmine had turned Karoline's weapon against her own family history into a boomerang that destroyed her attacker. The next morning, newspaper headlines across the country led with the story. The Washington Post. Crockett uses family history to devastate Leavitt on immigration. The New York Times. How one politician's research ended another's career. CNN itself ran analysis pieces examining how Jasmine had prepared for the encounter and what it meant for political discourse going forward. Conservative media tried to dismiss the revelations as irrelevant historical trivia, but the damage was irreversible. Karoline's own supporters began questioning her authenticity and her commitment to the immigration positions she'd championed. The revelation that her family had benefited from exactly the policies she opposed made her seem hypocritical at best and completely disingenuous at worst. Within a week, Karoline's poll numbers in her home state of New Hampshire had dropped 15 points. Republican donors began distancing themselves from her, and several speaking engagements were quietly canceled. The carefully constructed image of the young conservative firebrand with deep American roots lay in ruins, replaced by questions about authenticity and family betrayal. But the impact extended far beyond Karoline's personal political fortunes. The exchange became a case study in political preparation and opposition research. Jasmine had demonstrated that personal attacks could be turned into devastating counterattacks with sufficient preparation and the right documentation. Political consultants across the country began advising their clients to research their own family histories before attacking opponents on issues of identity and belonging. The incident also sparked broader conversations about immigration and American identity. If the Leavitt family's story was representative, how many other Americans had immigration stories that contradicted their current political positions? How many families had benefited from generous immigration policies while supporting politicians who wanted to eliminate those same policies for others? Social media became flooded with people researching and sharing their own family immigration stories. Many discovered that their ancestors had arrived under circumstances that would be classified as economic migration or refugee status under current definitions. The hashtag #MyImmigrationStory trended for weeks as Americans grappled with the complexity of their own family histories. For Jasmine, the encounter catapulted her from a promising freshman congresswoman to a national political figure. Her fundraising increased dramatically, and she received speaking invitations from across the country. More importantly, she had demonstrated a level of political skill and preparation that marked her as a rising star in the Democratic Party. The research that made the takedown possible had required months of preparation. Jasmine's staff had quietly worked with genealogical researchers and immigration historians to compile comprehensive background information on all her potential political opponents. They had identified vulnerabilities and prepared responses to likely attacks, but they had hoped never to need them. When Karoline chose to make the encounter personal by questioning Jasmine's authenticity and American connections, she walked directly into a trap that had been months in the making. The irony was that Karoline could have avoided the entire debacle by sticking to policy disagreements and avoiding personal attacks. 3 months after the CNN encounter, Karoline announced that she would not be seeking any elected office in the near future and would be taking time for personal reflection and family research. Her statement included an acknowledgement that she had not been fully aware of her own family's immigration history and that the revelations had caused her to reconsider some of her positions. It was a gracious admission of defeat, but it came too late to salvage her political career. The encounter became required viewing in political communication classes across the country. Students analyzed how Jasmine had prepared for the attack, how she had structured her response for maximum impact, and how she had used documentary evidence to support her counterattack. The exchange was also studied in journalism schools as an example of how unprepared guests could be completely exposed by better prepared opponents. For immigration advocates, the exchange became a powerful tool for challenging anti-immigration rhetoric. If even the most vocal immigration hardliners had family stories that contradicted their positions, it suggested that current immigration debates were more about politics than principles. The Leavitt family revelations became shorthand for hypocrisy on immigration issues, with opponents regularly challenging politicians to research their own family histories before taking hardline positions. The psychological impact on other politicians was immediate and significant. Several prominent Republicans began quietly researching their own family immigration stories to avoid similar embarrassments. Some discovered information that caused them to moderate their positions, while others simply became more careful about how they framed their arguments on immigration issues. The encounter also changed how political opponents prepared for debates and interviews. The standard practice of researching policy positions and voting records expanded to include comprehensive background research on family histories, business dealings, and personal statements going back years or even decades. Political campaigns began investing much more heavily in opposition research, knowing that any vulnerability could be exploited by better-prepared opponents. For Jasmine personally, the victory came with both opportunities and challenges. While her national profile increased dramatically, she also became a target for more sophisticated attacks from better-prepared opponents. Conservative operatives began conducting extensive research into her own background, looking for any inconsistencies or vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future encounters. The success also raised expectations for her future performances. Voters and media who had witnessed her demolition of Karoline expected similar displays of preparation and political skill in every subsequent appearance. This created pressure to maintain an impossibly high standard of performance, while also making her a more attractive target for opponents seeking to make their own reputations by taking down a rising star. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on the nature of political discourse itself. The encounter demonstrated that personal attacks based on identity and belonging could be turned into devastating counterattacks with sufficient preparation and research. This created a new dynamic where politicians had to be much more careful about the personal nature of their attacks, knowing that opponents might have equally damaging information about their own backgrounds. 1 year after the CNN encounter, political scientists were still analyzing its impact on American political discourse. Some argued that it had raised the level of political preparation and made politicians more accountable for their positions and their pasts. Others worried that it had created an arms race in opposition research that would make political discourse even more personal and destructive. What everyone agreed on was that Jasmine Crockett had demonstrated a level of political skill and preparation that marked her as one of the most formidable political figures of her generation. The encounter with Karoline Leavitt had been more than just a political victory. It had been a masterclass in how preparation, research, and strategic thinking could turn defense into devastating offense. As Jasmine continued her congressional career, the lessons of that CNN evening remained with her. She had learned that in politics, as in law, preparation was everything, but she had also learned that with great political skill came great responsibility. The power to destroy an opponent's career with well-researched information was a power that had to be used carefully and judiciously. The encounter had changed both women's lives forever, but it had also changed American politics in ways that would be felt for years to come. In the end, the most lasting impact might have been the demonstration that authentic preparation and genuine commitment to principles could triumph over manufactured political personas and carefully crafted narratives. Jasmine had shown that doing the homework, understanding the issues, and being prepared to defend your positions with facts and evidence was still the most powerful force in American politics. The CNN encounter between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt would be remembered as the moment when thorough preparation met unprepared ambition, and preparation won decisively.